Good evening. A fire is still raging tonight at one of Britain's biggest oil depots. Millions of gallons of fuel were set ablaze by a series of massive explosions at the plant in Hertfordshire this morning. 43 people were injured, 2 seriously, as the blast shook homes for miles around. Police don't yet know what caused the accident, but believe it was an accident. The first explosion happened just after 6 o'clock this morning at the Buncefield oil depot in Hemel Hempstead. Satellite pictures show the smoke from the fire spread over hundreds of square miles. First tonight, our special correspondent Gavin Hewitt, who's at the scene now. Gavin.
For 18 hours this fire has been burning, and tonight it continues to burn fiercely. There are 150 firefighters on the site. They haven't yet begun to control the blaze. They're expected to do that in the next few hours or possibly tomorrow morning. And whenever they do it, it's going to be a very, very difficult task. It was still dark when one of Britain's largest fuel depots exploded. People living nearly 100 miles away from Hemel Hempstead reported hearing the blast. Dense, oily fireballs billowed into the night sky. There were suspicions this might have been some kind of attack, but police are almost certain this was a very serious industrial accident. A local CCTV camera caught the moment Buncefield Oil Terminal exploded. Among those living close by was Ian Stowe.
I was absolutely jolted right across my bed. It for all the world felt as if I'd been hit by a truck. And what had clearly happened was that the bedroom windows, including their frames, had been blown right in at some huge force and knocked me across the bed and covered me with bits of wood and glass and so on.
The oil depot is on an industrial estate. Ceilings partly collapsed, and in some offices the wall was pitted with glass fragments. Some distance from the fire, computers were blown across desks. A worker inside here later described what happened to him.
I sat down and all of a sudden there was a huge orange light and a massive explosion which blew the doors through and knocked me off my chair. The ceiling fell in. I was aware of the fact that shards of glass and bits of metal were flying past me as it pushed me across towards the wall.
Houses also were damaged. This was the ceiling of Mike Johnson's property, 3 miles from the depot.
Heard this huge rumble first, so the whole thing was just shaking, the whole house was shaking. That was for quite a few seconds before there was this boom.
And this is what happened to the front window of a nearby bakery.
The house was exploding. It just seemed like it was inside the house. It was just so loud. It was just phenomenal.
It was horrendous. It was really frightening. It actually shook the house. We thought, first of all, I thought there was an explosion downstairs, and I thought, no, we're still here. Maybe next door had gone up because it was like nobody there at the moment, and it was horrendous.
The house literally tremoured, so obviously with the concern got up, went downstairs, and our patio doors had actually been blown off the hinges.
I got up and I had a look out the window because there was alarms going off all over the place. Next thing I could see these flames just on the horizon over there, and they were monstrous. They were going up 400 or 500 feet in the air.
With a plume of dark, acrid smoke drifting across parts of the town, police wore face masks and over 2,000 residents were evacuated. Seeing just how immense these flames are, it is surprising that there weren't more casualties. But one of the reasons for that is that this fire started at 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning when there weren't many people around.
It looks as if we've got off a lot more light than you might expect in an explosion of this size. The fact that it occurred at the time it did was probably the saving grace there.
Looking down at the scale of this, there were incredibly fewer than 45 injuries, and most of those were minor, and just 2 people remain in hospital. Even so, for the emergency services, this was a major challenge.
This is possibly the largest incident of this kind in peacetime Europe, so it just puts some perspective on what we're dealing with.
And this was the M1 today, eerily quiet with long stretches closed to traffic as smoke drifted across the carriageways. Some flights in and out of Heathrow were also disrupted. This was the scene tonight close to the depot. The fire is being allowed to burn. Sometime soon, 150 firefighters will attack the blaze, hoping to use 25,000 litres of foam a minute in a bid to blanket the fire. Investigators also are standing by to discover what caused one of the most severe blazes seen in this country. There is one bit of good news tonight. The M1 in Hertfordshire in both directions has reopened. And one thing I want to underline from having spoken to police officers and fire officers here today, they believe, considering everything, this has been a very, very lucky community. Darren.
Gavin, thank you for that. Health officials have been warning local people to stay out of the smoke, and they say that although the health risks are small, the fumes could affect people suffering from respiratory diseases such as asthma and chronic bronchitis. Daniel Bircher reports.
Advancing slowly, covering an ever wider area, a jet-black layer of cloud. And it's the composition of this that health officials have been concentrating on, working with those at the oil depot, with the Environment Agency, with weather forecasters, to find out if it's dangerous and where it's going.
We have got work in hand to sample the smoke to be clearer about exactly what's in it and what it's made up of. And really we need to know more about this before we can understand what long-term implications there may be, if any.
From what they know about the fuel stored at the depot, they are reassured, but there is still a risk that particles in the cloud might cause breathing problems, not especially dangerous to healthy individuals, but they could lead to complications for those with existing respiratory conditions. No direct need for medical care at this temporary shelter, an ambulance worker helping to hand out food instead, but advice has been issued to those in the immediate vicinity. Residents are being told to stay inside, keeping their doors and windows closed. And people with conditions like asthma or bronchitis should have access to their medication.
The main problems with this kind of smoke, I mean, it's basically carbon, like soot. That's really what's in it, and it's the particles that it forms that cause most of the problems, the small particles. When they go into the lungs, they cause an irritation.
This satellite image shows how varying winds at low and higher altitudes are pushing the cloud in several directions. Its path closely monitored, but while doctors have reported more calls asking for advice, the latest information from hospitals and GPs is that there has not been a noticeable increase in cases of respiratory illness. Daniel Bircher, BBC News.
The emergency services say they're keeping an open mind about what caused the explosions. Investigators will begin studying the wreckage of the plant once the fire has been put out. And they'll be examining witness statements for any clues as to how it happened. Here's Ben Brown.
It may take days for this blaze to burn itself out. For the moment, firefighters can only try and contain it. No one yet knows what caused the explosion. One theory is that petrol leaked out of a pipeline and turned into vapour. It was then ignited by a spark, perhaps from an electrical fault or maybe even static electricity.
There are so many places, so many causes, potential causes of sparks, that you'll probably never find out exactly what happened. The one thing you can be sure of is that it won't be direct human causation, because the people who work in these places are very safety conscious. Their lives are on the line after all. If this explosion had been caused by somebody striking a spark, he would have been dead almost instantly.
Well, investigators may never find the crucial clue as to what caused the fire at Buncefield. What we do know is the first explosion happened around 6 this morning, followed soon afterwards by secondary blasts. The fire's now destroyed the northern half of the terminal. Buncefield is, or was, one of the biggest oil depots in Britain, with 26 giant storage tanks. A network of pipelines feed fuel supplies in and out of it to places such as Heathrow and Gatwick airports. And 400 tanker lorries are loaded up with fuel here every day. So today's explosion brought a wave of panic buying by some motorists who fear that supplies will now run out. Police and oil companies, though, have urged drivers to stay calm and promised that there are plenty of alternative supplies.
Our recent experience is that panic buying itself leads to a shortage of petrol. Buncefield is just one of a number of terminals nationally, and there is absolutely no need to panic buy.
Even so, millions of gallons of fuel are going up in smoke tonight, and experts haven't even begun to count the financial cost of what happened here today. Ben Brown, BBC News.
Well, let's get the very latest now from Gavin Hewitt, who's at the scene. Gavin, what more do we know about how the authorities plan to tackle the blaze?
Well, all day the firefighters here have been working on a plan, and they're going to approach this in 4 phases, step by step, trying to blanket off one area before moving on to another. And of course tomorrow this will lead to some further disruption, perhaps not on the motorways, but perhaps also at the airports, and also a large number of schools in this local area will be closed. And one of the reasons for that is that even though they're optimistic they can contain this, there are still some fuel tanks there they fear might explode, so they have to move very cautiously, and as Ben Brown says, it may take several days to put this fire out. Darren.
Gavin, thank you for that. And later in the programme we'll have a powerful eyewitness account of this morning's explosions. On to other news now, and the former Conservative leadership contender Kenneth Clarke has criticised David Cameron over his decision to withdraw Tory MEPs from the European Parliament's main centre-right group. In a BBC interview, Mr Clarke described the decision as slightly headbanging. James Hardy reports.
That was the easy bit. David Cameron swept to victory on a wave of euphoria only 5 days ago. And that's all the time it's taken for the divisive issue Europe to erupt once again. At the forefront, as ever, the defeated pro-European leadership candidate Ken Clarke. He once aligned himself with Tony Blair over Europe, and now he's warning that Mr Cameron's in danger of becoming the most Eurosceptic Tory leader ever. At issue, plans to withdraw from the main centre-right grouping in the European Parliament.
Given all the goodwill that's surrounding his taking over and the optimism everybody has for him, I really think what a pity to insist on finding some new, slightly head-banging Eurosceptic position to take up as his first act in the leadership.
So an early test for Mr Cameron. His new policy chief, though, insisted the move's simply common sense.
That means we can't be part of a grouping that, although we share much with it, disagrees with us about the extent to which Europe tends towards becoming a sort of United States of Europe.
The row centres on the Tories' 13-year membership of the Federalist European People's Party at Strasbourg. Mr Cameron wants his Euro MPs to leave. That's unpopular with most of them and quite a few at Westminster, but it did help persuade many Eurosceptics to back his leadership campaign. By putting down this marker on Europe, David Cameron's shown he's not afraid to ruffle a few Tory feathers, and he'll be at it again tomorrow, this time with a plan to force local parties to select a higher number of women candidates, and that's bound to upset more than a few traditionalists. James Hardy, BBC News, Westminster.
There's still no news tonight on the fate of Norman Kember, the British peace activist who's being held in Iraq with 3 other Westerners. The extended deadline set by the kidnappers ran out yesterday. They've threatened to kill the group unless thousands of Iraqi prisoners are freed. There's an armed siege in the Maindee area of Newport tonight. Police have moved some residents while they try to speak to a suspect. Officers have refused to comment on claims that the operation is connected to the shooting of PC Sharon Beshenivsky in Bradford last month. The Ministry of Defence has confirmed the findings of an investigation by the BBC, which shows that the Territorial Army is more than 7,000 troops under strength. But it says it doesn't believe the manning crisis is the result of people not wanting to be called up for service in Iraq, as Jonathan Charles reports.
Territorial Army troops train for a 6-month tour of duty in Iraq. The demands on the part-time soldiers have never been greater, but members of the organisation are now quitting at the rate of 600 a month. Recruitment is down sharply. The TA, whose members also hold down civilian jobs, is now 7,000 troops under strength. Called up increasingly for active service, they now account for 10% of all British forces in Iraq.
I don't think there's any evidence to suggest that our involvement in Iraq has had any impact. We have issues concerning recruitment and retention. We have a plan which we're tackling, but the reserve forces have met all the demands made on them and will continue to do so.
Right, SA80, A1.
But senior TA commanders have admitted to us that there could be what they call a subtle Iraq influence. Some troops have been unable to get proper health care on their return from Iraq. A few have been sacked from their civilian jobs. Scott Garthley, who was wounded in Iraq, told me such stories do have an impact on recruitment and retention.
Our ability to meet our commitments is grossly affected. And what it means is we will not be able to be the operational fighting force that we have been in the past.
The TA is now spending £3 million on advertising, but so far the glossy commercials have brought in only a few hundred new recruits.
What you actually need is a change in culture in the Ministry of Defence. The relationship between a regular and a reservist should be seamless. They should all be entitled to the same treatment.
And if Britain's to fulfil its Iraqi and other commitments for years to come, the TA needs to get back up to full strength. Jonathan Charles, BBC News.
Paramount Pictures has announced it's buying the independent Hollywood film studio DreamWorks for $1.5 billion. The deal gives Paramount an extended library of 59 films. DreamWorks was founded 11 years ago by the director Steven Spielberg. Fellow performers have paid tribute to the American comedian and actor Richard Pryor. He died in California last night at the age of 65 after suffering from multiple sclerosis for almost 20 years. From New York, Jeremy Cook reports.
A black man who changed American comedy by bringing racial humour out of the ghetto and into the mainstream. In the 1970s, this was at times shocking, cutting-edge material.
I don't want to never see no more police in my life. At my house, taking my ass to jail.
By the 1980s, Richard Pryor was Hollywood A-list. In Superman 3, he was paid $1 million more than Christopher Reeve.
We're on the ground, guys.
For African Americans, he became and remains an inspirational figure.
He was a great comedian, a great actor, and a good person.
I take Richard Pryor's spirit with me everywhere I go. Definitely influential he was for every comedian that you see right now that's out there, from Eddie Murphy on down. We were influenced by Richard Pryor.
But the man remembered on Hollywood's Walk of Fame this weekend suffered dark times too. In 1980, Richard Pryor was critically burned, a suicide attempt while on a cocaine binge. Typically, it became material for a film and the stand-up act.
I remember this one was straight to match like this. It's like, what's that? Richard Pryor running down the street.
With the 1986 diagnosis of multiple sclerosis, the long decline began. Richard Pryor, a man who was born in a brothel to a prostitute mother, but rose to international stardom. Jeremy Cook, BBC News, New York.
As you may have just seen, England cricketer Andrew Flintoff has been crowned the BBC Sports Personality of the Year. The all-rounder, currently on tour with the England team in Pakistan, was voted the winner this evening after his performances in the Ashes this summer. Yachtswoman Ellen MacArthur finished second, with the Liverpool captain Stephen Gerrard third. Well, more now on our top story, the huge fire at the oil depot in Hemel Hempstead in Hertfordshire. Just minutes after the first explosions, two young eyewitnesses managed to take some powerful pictures from just outside the depot as the blaze began to spread. Duncan Kennedy reports.
Early enough to record the explosions, close enough to feel the heat from the flames. These dramatic pictures taken by two amateur documentary makers minutes after today's events began.
This is a massive fire and it must have been a massive explosion.
Andy Dicker and Andy Ash decided to risk everything to shoot these images, getting to within 50 metres of the inferno.
My face is on fire. It is actually Satan coming to Earth in the form of oil.
And some of those flames are at least reaching 200 feet high.
After spotting one oil tank still intact, the two men decide they've had enough.
That one over there hasn't gone up yet. So we're heading that way, 3/4 of a mile, and we're going now, quick.
With that, the two men raced away as the fire spread across the depot. Later, at a much safer distance, they told me how ferocious the blaze had been.
Well, the sound was very, it was kind of a scary sound, like a roaring sound. The boom itself was, it was something I've never experienced before. It almost took the air out of my lungs.
If you looked in the direction of the flames, it was hard to look at. It was that hot. You really felt, really felt it on your face.
By getting so close, both men knew that they were risking their lives. But their pictures are just one more example of growing public involvement in the recording of major news events. Duncan Kennedy, BBC News in Hemel Hempstead.
Let's get the latest on the weather now with Isabel Lang. Isabel.
Thanks very much, Darren. Well, obviously the wind strength and direction is very important over the next 12 hours or so, just to see where this smoke plume is going to go. And I think the winds will strengthen a little bit. They'll be picking up more from a north or northeasterly direction, and that'll drive that smoke plume further and further to the southwest, right down to the Channel coast, or possibly across the English Channel. We'll see a front coming in as well. Now that'll help lift any fog and frost overnight, and it'll eventually bring some rain into the southeast by morning as well. Now some of that rain could well sort of wash some of those smoke particles right down to low levels. You might even see some sootiness on your car tomorrow morning. But that rain will eventually push through, and then we'll see clearer skies following. So, after a cold start in northern areas, some winter sunshine to look forward to, and I think for most of us tomorrow it will be an improving picture. So, in the morning, still a lot of low cloud and sort of drizzliness, pretty mucky start actually in the south tomorrow, but that will gradually clear away from the south coast through the afternoon, and then we'll be all in the same boat really. A lot of fine and sunny weather to come to start the week, and feeling pleasant enough in the south, although a colder feeling afternoon in the north after a pretty mild weekend. Temperatures really struggling in the north tomorrow at around 4 to 7 Celsius. Now with these clear skies, obviously the frost returns again tomorrow night. There'll be some fog patches forming as the winds fall light as well. But that fog and frost not causing us too many problems, and clearing pretty smartly on Tuesday. And then a lot of fine weather again, a fair breeze from the northwest. Some sunshine for many, but later some cloud and rain arriving in the north. That's it. Back to you, Darren.
Isabel, thank you. Now, just a reminder that you can see more on all of today's stories over on BBC News 24, including the very latest on the Hemel Hempstead oil fire. But that's it from us. Good night.